Lauson seems to have always been at their best during their most difficult times. As early as 1935, at the height of the Depression and with the company in bankruptcy, the first engine of what I've started calling their second-generation design was designed, produced, and brought to market around 1937. The major difference in this design from the first-generation design is that simple spur gears drive the camshaft, with it now being in parallel orientation to the crankshaft. This allows a single cam lobe to service both valves through a pair of valve followers. The governor was also moved to the crankshaft and operated by a set of flyweights mounted to a collar positioned between the crankshaft counterweight and the magneto plate. The first engine of this design was the RLA, which is the engine you see now. The RLA was produced throughout the war, and every RLA I have ever seen has been tagged with the Department of Navy identification. These were half-horsepower engines, and it appears that most of these engines were set up to power generators, I assume for field communications. I've seen many mounted in a frame and set up to drive a generator with dual 500-volt and 12-volt outputs, which would have been typical of a vacuum tube radio of the era. The civilian version of the RLA was the RLC, brought to market around 1937 also. These engines were produced with either a suction or float carburetor. As you can see, I have one of both types in my collection. Many different configurations of RLC were built, some with pedal start, lever start, rope start. In addition, there was a special model type RLB built for washing machine use, though Lauson must not have built many because I have never seen one. I also have seen a few model RLE that look much like an RLA, though I have little information about them and their use. Beginning around 1937, Lauson introduced their model RSC. The model type RSC, built possibly into the early 1950s, was undeniably their most popular small engine model that Lauson produced. These engines weighed around 30 pounds and appeared to be a scaled-up version of the RLC you saw previously. When these engines were first produced, they were stated to develop 1 horsepower, but later engineering changes increased their power output to 1.5 horsepower sometime during their production period. The RSC was built with pedal start, lever start, and rope start. They came equipped with float carburetors and suction carburetors, and the variety of these engines in this series is numerous. The base engine for the series is the RSC 591, an example of which you see here. Also pictured is an RSC 703, the engine equipped with a 6-to-1 gear reduction unit. RSCs were widely used in World War II, especially to power aircraft heaters, and the Stuart Warner name appears frequently within this context. A marine air-cooled version of this engine was built, badged the RSM, and a water-cooled variant of this engine was also built, badged a model type RC. As I did in the previous video series, I'll take a brief aside here and discuss this Goodall Lauson vertical shaft engine. The particular engine was the brainchild of Leonard Goodall, the man credited here in America with establishing the rotary mower as a household fixture. Early in the 1930s, Goodall, an independent inventor, began development of the rotary power mower. In July of 1940, the U.S. Patent Office issued the first rotary mower patent for him. Over the following several years, he was issued 2 additional rotary mower patents. Toward the end of World War II, Goodall searched for a company that was willing to construct vertical shaft engines that power his mower. His discussions with several small engine manufacturers culminated in his signing a contract with Lauson to build modified RSC engines to his specification for vertical shaft operation, and to sell these engines exclusively to his company for a period of 5 years. The result of this endeavor is the engine you see here. It's a Lauson RSC block turned on its side and modified as per Goodall's specifications to make it a vertical shaft engine. Lauson never assigned a model type designation to this engine, and Lauson did not provide identification badges to the RSC Goodall engines they sold to Goodall. These engines went into production possibly as early as 1946. As a sidebar to this discussion, it's interesting to note that the rotary mower immediately became immensely popular due to its superior performance over a reel-type mower, and also due to its cheaper manufacturing cost, which could be passed on to the customer. Goodall's patents were infringed upon many times by many companies, but at the advice of his legal counsel, Goodall did not contest any of these infringements. He was advised that his pockets probably weren't deep enough to win the legal battles that would ensue. So he never attempted to protect his patent rights, though his mowers carried tags threatening that he would. Still within this second-generation group of engines, Lauson also introduced the model type TLC, also around 1937. This is a 50-pound, 2.3 horsepower cast iron engine and is a big brother to the RSC model type. The TLC model type was also a popular engine for Lauson and was produced with kickstart, crank start, lever start, and rope start. This particular engine is a Salisbury scooter engine built specifically for the Model 74 Salisbury motor scooter. This model type PAC was first introduced in 1946. This engine is an 85-pound, 4.5 horsepower engine and is a scaled-up version of the TLC. The PAC did not share the same popularity as the RLC, RSC, or TLC you saw previously. These engines were probably built as a replacement to the model type LB that you saw earlier in this video series. The PAC was upgraded by an announcement of the type PAH in the early 1950s. Then in 1956 a PAX model type as well as a P model type were also introduced. My collection currently does not contain a PAH, PAX, or any of the P models to show you. However, all these engines were based upon this PAC block and all have nearly an 18 cubic inch displacement. The power output of these engines was increased as the new models were introduced, culminating with the 6 1/4 horsepower P25 through P44 model types. This series of engines was the largest in horsepower small engines that the Lauson Manufacturing Company built. Now we go from the physically largest to the physically smallest small engine that was built by Lauson. Around 1948, Lauson introduced the LMC model type you see here. These were small cast iron engines of 3/4 horsepower, and it is my belief that they were built to replace the RLC model type you saw earlier in this video series. They are small displacement engines with a bore of 1 5/8 inches, and they were used primarily on small reel-type lawnmowers. The LMC were built in two basic configurations. The earlier model were equipped with the Tillotson YA2A carburetor, and the later models were equipped with the Tillotson MT7A carburetor. My collection and this video contains a representative of each.